The cold metallic hum of the outpost's ventilation system was the only sound piercing the silence when the alarm shattered the quiet. Captain Rhys Morgan bolted upright, his heart pounding in sync with the flashing red lights. The acrid scent of burnt circuitry hung in the air, mingling with the faint but unmistakable odor of ionized steel, a sure sign of an approaching battle. "Captain?" Lieutenant Ada Lawson's voice crackled through his calm, her usual calm punctuated by urgency. "We've got incoming. Multiple bogies entering the atmosphere. It's them." Rhys didn't need clarification. The Mrax. For weeks, rumors had circulated through the Terran outpost about the distant and brutal alien species. No one knew when they'd strike, only that when they did, it would be swift and merciless. Rhys slammed his fist onto the control panel, engaging the outpost's defense systems. His mind raced. This outpost wasn't prepared for full-scale combat. It was a mining station on the fringe of Terran space, barely manned and poorly equipped. The nearest reinforcement fleet was days away, time they didn't have. "Ada, get a visual," Rhys commanded, his voice tightening. He grabbed his rifle, strapping it to his chest as he sprinted toward the command center. His boots echoed down the narrow corridors, and as he passed, the other soldiers snapped into action, faces pale but determined. When he reached the command room, the screen flickered to life, revealing the approaching Mrax warships. Jagged and ominous, the ships tore through the upper atmosphere, their dark hulls shimmering against the pale sky like predator fins slicing through water. "They're moving fast," Ada muttered, standing beside him. Her fingers danced across the control panel, trying to scramble a defense grid that was woefully inadequate. Her normally steady demeanor cracked slightly as she muttered, "We're sitting ducks here." Rhys' jaw clenched. The Mrax were relentless. He had heard the stories from the few who had survived their raids. Cold-blooded warriors with advanced technology and an insatiable desire to dominate weaker species. And they considered humanity weak. "We're not giving them the satisfaction," Rhys growled. He turned to Ada, his voice low but fierce. "We hold this line." Ada nodded, her eyes hardening as she transferred tactical data to his wrist display. "If they want a fight, we'll give them one." The ground shuddered beneath their feet as the first impact rocked the outpost. Explosions erupted along the northern perimeter, and the screen showed Mrax assault pods crashing into the earth, disgorging legions of their soldiers. Towering figures clad in sleek armor, their weapons glowing with the ominous hum of alien technology. Rhys barked into his comms. "All units, engage at the choke points. We're cutting them off here." His heart thudded in his chest, a beat in time with the rapid barrage of artillery and gunfire outside. As he stormed out of the command room, Ada at his side, a knot of fear coiled in his stomach. Not fear of death, he'd made peace with that long ago, but fear of failure. He'd led men to their deaths before, and the weight of it never left. But this time, there was no fallback, no retreat. They stood on the edge of extinction. The door slid open to reveal the chaos outside. Fire and smoke twisted through the air, and the sky crackled with the energy of battle. Rhys gritted his teeth. This would be their first strike against the Mrax. And by God, he intended to make it count. "Captain!" Ada shouted over the roar of gunfire. "We've got a breach at Sector 4. Rhys gave a grim nod, gripping his rifle tighter. "Let's move. We make our stand here." The battle had begun. The hiss of pressurized doors slid open as Rhys and Ada rushed into Sector 4. The outpost corridors, once cold and sterile, were now filled with thick smoke, flashing lights, and the low groan of twisted metal. Rhys inhaled, the acrid tang of burning polymers biting the back of his throat as he surveyed the scene. The Mrax were pushing through. Ada's voice cut through the chaos, her eyes darting between the tactical display on her wrist. "They've breached our northern perimeter defenses. Casualties coming in from all fronts. If we don't fortify the interior, they'll take the central reactor." Rhys nodded, his mind already calculating their slim options. "Then we hold them here. This sector is the last line before they reach the command center." He glanced at the group of soldiers gathering in the hall, their faces smeared with sweat and soot, fear flickering behind their determination. "We've got this, Captain," a soldier barked, her voice steady despite the panic in the air. Sergeant Kira, a seasoned fighter with scars that told stories of battles won and lost, gripped her rifle with iron resolve. "We'll make sure those bastards never get close." Reese nodded, though his stomach churned. The Mraks were relentless. Towering, monstrous figures with razor-sharp instincts and a complete lack of mercy, they overwhelmed weaker species like a natural disaster, crushing anything that stood in their path. And they were coming straight for humanity's throat. An explosion rocked the ground beneath them, causing dust and debris to fall from the ceiling. Reese staggered slightly, his heart pounding in his chest as alarms blared louder. He turned to Ada, her face now illuminated by the red glow of the emergency lights. "We need to slow them down. Focus on choke points, anything to delay their advance. Every second counts." Ada's fingers danced over her tactical screen. "I can reroute power from auxiliary systems to reinforce the blast doors, but it won't last long." Her eyes flicked up to meet his, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "We're running out of time, Reese." "I know." Reese grabbed his comm unit. "All units, fall back to Sector 4. Prepare for a defensive stand. We hold this position at all costs." As soldiers scrambled into formation, the ground trembled again. Through the thick smoke, Reese could see the Mraks assault units breaching the corridor, hulking figures covered in matte black armor, their weapons crackling with alien energy. The sheer size of them, combined with their predatory grace, sent a chill down his spine. They were like walking tanks, bred for war. "Fire!" Reese commanded, his voice echoing through the hall. A barrage of gunfire erupted, filling the air with the deafening roar of human determination. Bullets ricocheted off the Mraks' armor, sparking against the metal, while others found weak spots, causing the invaders to stagger. But for every one that fell, two more advanced, their dark eyes fixed on their prey. Beside him, Ada let loose a series of rapid shots, her aim precise, but even she couldn't mask her frustration. "Damn it, they're too fast," she muttered under her breath. "They're testing our defenses," Reese said, watching as the Mraks moved with calculated precision. "This isn't a full push yet. They're looking for weaknesses." Kira barked orders to the soldiers at the barricades, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Hold your ground. Aim for the joints, under the armor." Her rifle spat bullets, each shot finding its mark, but even she knew it wasn't enough. Reese's pulse quickened as he realized what was coming. The Mraks would soon push in force. And when they did, they would hit like a tidal wave. "We have to think bigger," Ada murmured, her eyes narrowing. She tapped a few more commands on her display. "There's a backup plan I've been working on, a last-ditch effort. But it's risky." "How risky?" Reese asked, a sinking feeling forming in his gut. Ada's gaze met his, her voice low. "We could overload the reactor." Reese blinked, momentarily stunned by the suggestion. Overloading the reactor would create a massive explosion, enough to level the entire outpost, and wipe out the Mraks' forces along with it. "It's either that or they take everything," she added, her voice calm but determined. "We can't let them have this outpost, Reese." He swallowed hard, glancing at the incoming tide of alien warriors. They were outnumbered and outgunned, their options dwindling by the second. Reese clenched his fists, the weight of command pressing down on him. "Do it," he said, his voice firm. "Prepare the reactor for overload." Ada gave a curt nod and set to work. The Mraks were getting closer. Reese could feel the ground tremble beneath their advance. It wouldn't be long now. The final stand had begun. The ground beneath Reese's feet trembled as the final alarm blared across the outpost. The rumbling wasn't just from the relentless Mraks advancing, but the reactor itself, now under the strain of the overload procedure Ada had initiated. Sweat dripped down the side of his face, his pulse thrumming in his ears as the seconds ticked away. "Reactor sequence initiated." Ada's voice came through the calm, strained but steady. "We have 15 minutes before this place turns into a crater. That's all we've got." Reese clenched his jaw, surveying the team around him. The soldiers were battered, exhausted, but unwavering. They had fought tooth and nail to protect humanity's last defense in this sector, and now it came down to a final gamble. "We evacuating, Captain?" Sergeant Kira asked, her voice rough from barking commands all night. Her eyes burned with the same fire that had kept them alive this long, but Reese saw the exhaustion beneath. Reese glanced at Ada's flickering display. "There's no evacuation plan," he said grimly. "If the Mrax reach the command center, the explosion will mean nothing. We're the only thing standing between them and humanity's fallback position." Kira swore under her breath. "So we die here, then?" "Only if we don't make them die first," Reese replied sharply, rallying the last of his strength. "We hold until the very end. Every second counts. Every single life lost on this ground slows them down." Ada's voice cut back in, more urgent now. "Reese, they breached the last checkpoint. They'll be here in minutes." He nodded, his chest tightening. The corridor ahead was dark, shadows flickering from the distant fires beyond the barricade. He could hear them coming now, the steady, methodical march of Mrax soldiers. The outpost's metal walls groaned under their assault, reverberating with the weight of impending destruction. "Positions!" Reese called out, his voice echoing across the dimly lit hall. He took his own place at the front line, rifle gripped tightly in his hands. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready for the storm that was about to break. The Mrax appeared, their dark, towering figures filling the corridor. They moved in sync, their alien armor reflecting the cold light of the emergency beacons. Reese could feel the dread settle over his troops like a suffocating blanket, but no one moved. No one faltered. "Fire!" Reese yelled. The corridor erupted in gunfire, the deafening noise a cacophony of human defiance. Bullets ricocheted off the Mrax armor, some finding purchase in the weak spots Ada had identified earlier. One by one, Mrax soldiers fell, but the rest pressed forward, their monstrous forms relentless. Reese squeezed the trigger of his rifle until his fingers went numb, taking down as many as he could. The air was thick with the smell of burning ozone, the heat from the overcharged reactor radiating through the floor. Sweat soaked his uniform, but he didn't care. He was fighting for every last second. Beside him, Ada fired off shots with grim determination, her face set in hard lines. "We need more time," she muttered, half to herself. "We're not going to hold them here long enough." Reese's mind raced. "Then we fall back to the reactor room. Set a manual detonation, and we'll bring the ceiling down on them. If we die, they die too." Ada looked at him, eyes wide. "Are you serious?" "It's the only way," he replied. "We can't let them take the outpost intact." Ada hesitated for a moment, her gaze darting between Reese and the approaching Mrax. Then, with a resigned nod, she said, "All right. But we'll need to move fast. Once we're in the reactor room, there's no coming back." Reese turned to Kira. "Sergeant, pull the remaining forces back. We're making our last stand in the reactor core." Kira's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. "You heard the captain," she shouted to the soldiers. "Fall back. Defensive line at the reactor." The soldiers retreated in an orderly rush, covering each other as they moved. Reese fired another burst at the advancing Mrax, then turned and ran with Ada toward the reactor chamber. The door slammed shut behind them with a heavy clang, the last barrier between them and the alien horde. Inside, the reactor hummed ominously, its core glowing a sickly green as the overload sequence neared completion. Ada dashed to the control panel, fingers flying over the keys. "Manual detonation armed," she said breathlessly. 5 minutes, Reese. "That's all we've got." Reese nodded, setting his rifle aside and bracing himself against the wall. He could hear the Mrax pounding on the door now, the metal groaning under their assault. "This is it," Ada whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. "We've done everything we can." Reese swallowed hard, the weight of the moment settling over him. He met Ada's gaze, the gravity of their shared decision clear in both of their eyes. They were the last line of defense, humanity's final hope in this desolate outpost. "We make it count," Reese said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "For all of them." And as the door began to buckle under the relentless assault, the reactor's hum turned into a roar, a countdown to the end. The final battle had begun. Reese stood in the heart of the reactor room, each breath heavy with anticipation. The reinforced door trembled under the relentless pounding from the Max soldiers outside. His fingers twitched, gripping his rifle instinctively, though he knew that the time for shooting had passed. Now, all that was left was to hold their ground and pray the detonation did its job. The hum of the reactor grew louder, vibrating through the floor as Ada worked frantically at the control panel, her brow furrowed in concentration. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her hands remained steady. Reese admired her resolve, even now, at the brink of their demise. "How much longer?" he asked, his voice tense but level. 2 minutes, she replied without looking up. Her voice was a mix of determination and fear. "Once I trigger the sequence, the overload will cascade faster. They won't have time to react." A loud clang echoed through the chamber as a dent appeared in the door. Reese turned, his heart pounding. The Mraks were close, too close. Kira stepped up beside him, her face a mask of defiance despite the exhaustion dragging her down. "They'll break through in seconds," she said, her voice low but urgent. "What's the plan when they do?" Reese didn't answer right away. He knew the truth, and so did she. There was no escape, no backup plan. They were buying time, nothing more. "We make them bleed for every inch," Reese finally said, his voice hardening with resolve. "No one makes it to this reactor." Kira gave a single nod, adjusting her rifle and taking her position by the door. She knew what was at stake and accepted it. There was no room for fear anymore, only the fight. Behind them, Ada cursed under her breath. "I've initiated the countdown," she called, her voice tight. 60 seconds. The pounding grew louder, and the door buckled inward. Reese could see the edges twisting, the thick steel groaning under the strain. The Mraks were unlike anything they had ever faced before, alien soldiers built for war, with armor that seemed impervious to human weapons. But even they had a breaking point. Reese raised his rifle, adrenaline surging through him. He'd faced death before, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about defiance. The door finally gave way with a thunderous crash, and the first wave of Mrak soldiers flooded into the room. They moved like shadows, fast and lethal, their alien eyes glowing in the dim light. "Hold the line!" Reese shouted, and the room erupted in gunfire. Bullets sparked off the Mrak's armor, some finding weak points, while others ricocheted harmlessly. Reese fired in controlled bursts, his shots deliberate and precise, but the Mraks kept coming, their sheer numbers overwhelming. Kira fought beside him, her face set in grim determination. She took down 2 soldiers with well-placed shots, but for every one that fell, another took its place. They were relentless, an unstoppable tide of destruction. "They're pushing through!" Ada yelled from the control panel, her voice strained. 30 seconds. Reese gritted his teeth, his rifle kicking back with each shot. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. His ears rang from the gunfire, but he didn't let up. Every second counted, every fallen enemy bought them a little more time. But then, in the chaos, he saw it, a Mrak's commander, larger and more heavily armored than the others, charging straight for Ada. Its claws gleamed in the dim light, and its eyes were locked on the reactor. "Kira!" Reese shouted, pointing to the commander. "Take it down!" Kira turned, but it was too late. The Mrak's commander reached Ada, swiping at her with brutal force. She barely dodged the blow, stumbling back, but the alien was relentless. It knocked her aside like a rag doll, sending her crashing into the console. Reese's heart lurched. He sprinted toward the commander, firing his rifle at its exposed joints, but the creature hardly flinched. It was too strong, too fast. Ada coughed, blood trickling from her mouth as she struggled to stand. "Reese," she wheezed, her voice weak. "The countdown. Focus on the detonation," Reese barked, throwing himself between her and the commander. He fired again, this time aiming for the alien's faceplate. The shot connected, and the creature staggered, but it wasn't enough. With a roar, the commander swung at Reese, and he barely dodged the blow. Pain shot through his side as the alien's claws grazed him, tearing through his armor. He stumbled but kept his footing, refusing to fall. Kira rejoined the fight, her rifle blazing. Together, they pressed the commander back, but the Mrak soldiers kept pouring in. The reactor room was quickly becoming a battlefield, and time was running out. 10 seconds! Ada called, her voice hoarse. Reese exchanged a glance with Kira. They both knew what was coming, but there was no hesitation in her eyes, only fierce determination. For humanity! She muttered, firing another round into the commander. Reese nodded, blood dripping down his side. For all of us! The reactor's hum reached a fever pitch. The countdown hit 0. And then, the world erupted in light,